How are you finding the industry at present?
The market's going through a fairly radical change at this point. It's in dire straits.
Richard Browne, a games industry executive and publishing and development consultant.
We can't take 5 years to make games anymore. That's the other part of the industry that's totally broken. Microsoft have not had a compelling IP in 15 years. They're kind of in an impossible situation. I want to see a 10-year plan of where this IP is going. Because if you start making it up as you go along, that becomes problematic.
Hey buddy, how are you?
Here to have some fun.
Before we dive in, let's start with a little who you are, what you do, and why.
Who am I? My name is Richard Browne. I've been in the video game business now for about 38 years. Started back in 1987 writing a game with a friend of mine on the BBC Micro, and then ended up going through a long journey through companies like Domark, and then Psygnosis, and then back to Domark. Don't do that. Then Philips Media, and then I moved to America to work for Microprose, and then I ran production for Universal Interactive Studios. And then I ran all of external development for THQ for about 8.5 years. Did a dalliance into film and TV and transmedia for a few years. Worked in interactive narrative for a couple of years. Then spun up a publishing operation for Digital Extremes externally to Warframe. Spent 5 years doing that, and now I'm a consultant to the world at large in the video game business, trying to help developers find funding and basically acting as an agent and a consultant.
And how are you finding the industry at present?
It's in dire straits, frankly. I mean, it's migrating is one big thing. I mean, being here in the US is where we're seeing the biggest challenges because of the costs. But we're basically migrating the industry into cheaper locations. But we went down a rabbit hole during COVID, and I don't think we've ever made it back out again. The market kind of expanded because everyone was stuck at home. Everyone started chasing live service games. Somebody realized, including myself, in the 22 kind of era that live service games can't be the solution to everybody because people have limited time. And so we've started moving away from live service games again because the bar of entry is so high. Now we're back to sort of like taking the safe bets and spending a lot of money doing AAA games, while the younger audience who play games are spending a lot more time playing indie games and playing stuff that feels more authentic to them. The market's going through a fairly radical change at this point, and so we're still playing off the same hymn sheet. It's something that needs to change rapidly. And then the fallout of all that is development business in the United States especially is kind of falling apart. Everyone's being paid too much. It's far too expensive, and so everyone's going elsewhere to get their games made. So it's a period of struggle, I would say.
Well, we were talking beforehand about the different age demographics within the sphere of gaming and what your kids are playing versus what we used to play. I mentioned Gears, like I'm a big Gears fan, and like this year's like the 20th anniversary of Gears with their new release of Payday. I'll obviously buy it, but one of the concerns that I raised before was the fact that there is this over-reliance on quote-unquote established franchises, whilst you look at movies like Obsession and you look at Backrooms, and they actually providing something new to the market. Why is there an over-reliance all the time on reboots and a stick to existing plays rather than a pivot to new and fresh?
I mean, historically, it's been a safe place to go. I think we're in a kind of another unique kind of period at the moment where the audience is kind of rapidly turning over. People like me are getting too old, and we don't have time to play games. And the new audience is coming through that have a totally different appreciation of what games are and how they interact with them and how they play them. I mean, I always say that my hidden superpower is having a 21-year-old and a 19-year-old, and I've watched them grow up and how they play with games, and it's so completely different to how I do. The thing with old IP is I think a lot of it is now getting tagged in what I call dad's IP. Star Wars has suffered from this. Star Wars is my generation of IP, right? I mean, I went to see it in the movie theater and I lived it, and I tried to get my children into it, and they really have no interest in it whatsoever. And you're seeing that in games too. I mean, the last Doom didn't do very well. Gears of War Reloaded didn't do very well. I mean, it's if you've kept the IP fresh all the way along with new entries in it and everything else, I think it's less of a problem. But when you've been having long breaks from these games, and so you've not fostered the next generation of player, they have no attachment to it. I mean, Doom is an IP that means a lot to me. And Doom is a game, the latest version, is a very different game to the one I grew up playing. And it's a brilliant game, but it didn't really resonate because it's not got the attachment with a new player. And so kids today Disney's trying to fix the Star Wars problem by doing Mandalorian and Grogu. So they're looking at kids, trying to get kids into the IP that they can then foster up. But the logical path to that is actually to remake the original movies with a new cast that they will connect with, rather than saying, hey, now go and watch the movies from 40 years ago, because they're never going to connect to that. And the same thing's happening with gaming IP. And so while the safe route is to keep sequeling things, because, hey, it sold that many times last time, it'll sell this many this time, what we need to be doing is actually bringing new IP to a new audience. But the cost of that for bigger publishers, especially, and first parties, is extremely high. But that's the other part of the industry that's totally broken. We can't take 5 years to make games anymore. We can't take 7 years to make games. You can't spend $300 million building the first IP. You really need to beachhead an IP at like $10 to $20 million and see if it works, see if it resonates, see if it has an audience. And then beyond that, you kind of move forward with sequels. And the sequel is basically, this is how we built games forever, right? Naughty Dog and Insomniac and all these great studios that are around, they built a game one, then they built on that technology and that IP with game two, and then they did game three. Now, back in those days, it was, a year between IP, whereas now it takes 5 years, right? Or 3 years at the minimum to do it. So what you end up doing is taking far too long and spending far too much money. And then if the first one fails, the only thing you can do is shut down the studio, which we're seeing right now, right? Compulsion Games are a fantastically talented group of people. South of Midnight was an odd game to greenlight. I'll say that. It's a very esoteric concept. It's a beautiful game. It's not the greatest game. The story and the world, I think, is beautiful. But the game it's a 70, it's an 80. But it's an IP that is very hard to get a connection to for a wide, broad audience, especially a younger audience. But what I would do with Compulsion right now is say, look, you've built these mechanics and you've built this technology and you've got this engine running. Let's go again with the second game at a lower budget based on that stuff, but build something a bit more commercial. They're not going to get that opportunity. And that's what we're seeing. And, the sort of 3 and out kind of path to success. So first game beachheads the IP, second game cements that in the audience, and the third one is generally the breakout hit. You look at CD Projekt and what they did with The Witcher. So I'm talking about Insomniac and Naughty Dog from like the 2000s. Now you look at it from a modern day. Witcher 1 was good. Witcher 2 built on that. Witcher 3 was their blowout success. If you look at Larian, they did Original Sin, they did Original Sin 2, and then they did Baldur's Gate. It takes time. It takes iteration. It takes a studio working together for years. And that's a 10-year process now, right? To do those 3 games. It's not a year like it used to be. It's a 10-year process. But no publisher will commit to that. And that's the only way you're going to see success, because great teams are based on working together over extended periods of time. And what we're seeing over the last 5 years is all these great studios just being thrown aside when they desperately need to do game 2 or they desperately need to do game 3. And that's kind of the situation we're in right now. It's just untenable. And so we need to go back. We need to start making smaller games. It doesn't have to be a 400-hour epic. We basically got trapped back in the late 2000s, early 2010s. We got trapped by GameStop because basically you had to make games that didn't churn. We did Darksiders, it was a great game. We did Darksiders 2. They made an order of 1 million units day one and then never reordered because they just churned it into used games that we never saw a dime of. So we started making games bigger and we started adding multiplayer to everything. And that just got the costs up and up and up and up. Now, in a world where everything is digital and you buy a game, you bought the game, you don't need to do that anymore. A 12 to 15 to 20-hour experience is fine, right? Just give someone an approachable game that they can have fun with and finish and go, you know what, that was great. And then build them a sequel that builds on that. That's what we need to be doing. And I think companies like Remedy are trying to shift towards that. They're not trying to take 5-10 years to do the next sequel to the next game. If companies like that, that's their bread and butter. That's what they need to do. Alan Wake 2 was far too big and took far too long and was too expensive. If you're going to do an Alan Wake 3, you do it in 3 years. And you do it as cheap as possible. And you don't make it 32 hours. You make it as long as the mechanics can survive.
Talking about like games that you enjoy, what are you drawn to at the moment? What are you playing at the moment?
I mean, this is it. I'm an old man. So the things I like are narrative single player experiences that I can sit down and finish. So I'm literally just at the last section of First Light, the new James Bond game, and it's spectacularly good. Poketopia, I've been playing a lot of, but the problem with Poketopia was I went away to Europe on a trip, and then I came back and I completely forgot what I was doing. So I'll have to spend some time getting back into that. But Ghost of Yotai I went through and loved. It's all games like that. And then I play as much indie stuff as I can. I'm a judge for the DevGam Awards in Portugal later this year, because that's where really innovative ideas come through. So you kind of like play as much of that stuff as possible just to see what new ideas are coming out, what's happening. But when I sit down and play a game, and this is where my kids are so radically different, I shut myself out and I pick up my PS5 controller or my Steam controller, and I'm just like sat there.
Yeah.
And I want nobody to talk to me. I'm like, this is what I'm doing for the next 3 or 4 hours. Leave me alone.
Yeah.
Whereas my kids, they've got the PC over there and they're playing with the game on here, and they've got Discord and YouTube and everything else open on a different screen. And so the game is kind of a part of an ecosystem rather than being the sole focus of what they're doing. They still play Genshin and they still play Honkai, and one of them is a Valorant player, but that's a social thing too, right? She plays Valorant because all the boys play Valorant. And so she loves it and she likes doing it, but they're talking all the time, right? It's a community thing. Whereas I don't like that stuff. I don't want to talk to anyone playing games. And frankly, my age, my reflexes are so crappy that I actually can't compete in things like Valorant. I'll get killed for the first 5 seconds, so no good. So I stick to the old man games that I like, and then dabble in everything else just to see what people are doing and what genius pieces of design these young teams are coming up with these days, because it's great to watch. I mean, I'm very heartened by the future of the industry, because access into it is so much easier than it has been since I was a kid, right? I mean, when I was a kid, it was me sitting at home doing graphics, doing programming, doing sound with a mate, getting a game done. And we haven't had that. When I do a talk at Reboot that goes through the whole 8-bit, 16-bit, 32-bit, when we got to the PlayStation era, and I was organizing PlayStation conferences with Phil Harrison, that was boardroom stuff, right? Suddenly you had to have a big development team. You had to have locked rooms where we could send dev kits, and the person coding at home, that wasn't a thing anymore. And now with Steam and AI, and the ability to just program games on your own, it's all come full circle again. And so, and there's an amazing amount of creativity when you put one very clever person in a room. Like, where did Minecraft come from, right? It was just Notch sitting in a room coming up with an idea. And first time I played the alpha of that, I was just like, this is insane.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't get it, but it's insane. And then my kids started playing with it. I'm like, okay, now I get it. And they still play with it today. I mean, they're now 21. I can't remember. Minecraft was what, 2011, somewhere around there. When they played with it, then they were tiny little children. They're grown adults and they still play Minecraft.
What are your takes on Minecraft and Roblox? Because I see a lot of people, for example, utilizing say like Roblox to build engagement around their franchise. So like Payday, for example, have used it recently in regards to notoriety, and it's getting some crazy numbers. But the challenge being is like you within a...
Will they shift over? Yeah.
How do you get them to shift over? Because for the very premise you said about community, you're trying to shift people from community to the way that we play in regards to an actual campaign or whatever.
Yeah, Roblox is a very interesting subject. When I first went to Digital Extremes, I actually pitched my boss at the time on the idea of, let's look at the top 4 Roblox games on the market. This was 2018. And let's do a professional version of them, because clearly it's connecting, right? I mean, Jailbreak, I think, was the top one at the time. And it had far more users than anybody on Steam, right, playing this game. And I'm like, why don't we just approach the guys who did it, do a professional version with them and release it? I think it would be successful. I think back then it possibly could have. Today, I don't think that's the case. But the problem with Roblox is it's a total lightning strike if you're successful in Roblox, for one. It doesn't monetize very well for people. And when you're splitting the money with Roblox and they get the majority of it, it's also not a great business proposition. But the thing that people forget is how much this is where people are playing Roblox. They're
Right.
not playing it on the PC and the console. They're playing it on their phone. I think it's like 80% still of Roblox interaction is on phone. So it's kids sitting around with their hand-me-down phones playing something really simplistic, but it's fun, and it's again something they can play with their friends. And it's, for me, it is the equivalent of when I used to go out into the playground at school is what Roblox is. So I used to go out and I'd play kick the can and I'd play British Bulldog, I'll play tag, whatever it is. That is what Roblox is for children today. They just go online and they play this game with their friends. And I think people are having some success with advertising. Was having breakfast with someone today who's using Roblox as an advertising medium. And so get the brand in front of kids nice and early. Lovely. But I think migrating, and I will say Payday's shocked me hugely, because I think that's a very odd IP to take to kids as a M-rated violent shooter. But it resonated, right? They made it very friendly for that audience. But can they convert them to Payday 2 players? That's really hard, especially when it's not on mobile. So they're trying to put them over to the main game and monetize them after that, and that doesn't seem to be happening as much. And we're still seeing people filtering out of Roblox as they reach their late teens. I mean, again, my kids dabble occasionally, mostly because there's no decent One Piece game, so they go and play sort of One Piece clones on Roblox. But generally, they've grown out of it. They don't really want that experience anymore. But that's what Roblox is trying to achieve, is trying to address, and they're trying to address it with visuals, which I don't think is the problem. Conversation we've had of late about how do we grow the market, how do we expand the market. The console business is 200 to 300 million players worldwide. It always has been, right? It has been for like 20 years at this point. And the big problem is, you put that in someone's hand, they don't know what to do with it. There's 200 or 300 million people in the planet who think this is a great thing to control the game with. Everyone else is really happy with just doing on this. So we can't expand the market that way. And that leads us to where we are. We've got expanding budgets and expanding time taken to make these visuals that are just spectacular. And the people who are growing up today, they don't care. I always tell the story about having a Halloween party, and I showed everyone Uncharted 4 when the PS4 came out, and all the parents are looking at it going, bloody hell, video games have come so far. Look how real it is. And all the kids were going, can we put Minecraft on now? I'm not interested in that. They don't care about visuals. So Roblox making things photorealistic isn't actually a solution. I mean, it's trying to grab an audience that's older, I guess, and bring them down to Roblox. But the people who are playing on Roblox, they don't care. They don't care if it's got ray tracing or path tracing or whatever else. They just want to play a fun game they can get into really quickly with their mates.
Yeah, and I also think that like photorealism ages really quickly in regards to you pick up a stuff that you used to play back in the day, and you kind of pick it up today, and it hasn't aged well. Whilst you look at others that have kind of gone against the curve in that regards, like the latest example that I see, and I really like the visuals on it, is Mixtape. Like they don't give two hoots about photorealism, but the actual experience that they deliver upon is really good. And I also think the word experience is really key in this day and age, because like looking back at where we've transitioned from packaged goods to digital to like live service and DLCs, we're now in an, I think anyways, and I'd love to get your take on this, where we're in an age where games as a genre is far too narrow. And I also want to kind of pivot and get your take on the whole platform debacle, specifically Xbox as well.
I mean, it's a mess. I mean, basically, if I was to summarize it very quickly, Microsoft has spent themselves into trouble. So by spending so much money buying Bethesda and Activision, they have basically made their life requirement to be a third-party publisher. You can't support a company of that size on one platform. So that kind of broke a dam and broke a problem, and they were already struggling as a console platform because they don't have the games, right? I mean, not to be cruel, but Microsoft have not had a compelling IP in 15 years. They had Halo, and they kind of killed Halo with Infinite. They had Gears of War. They're trying to bring Gears of War back. I don't think it will be successful. I don't think it will be not successful. It'll do fine, but they don't have anything. Sony have a fleet of studios they can go to, right? They've got Naughty Dog, Insomniac, Sucker Punch, Sony Santa Monica, Housemarque, Polyphony, Team Asobi, Guerrilla. They've got 7 or 8 studios that are going to create Game of the Year quality games sometime during the lifespan of of your console that you spend $600 on. Microsoft don't have that. So why would I buy one? And then they can't go exclusive because they're Microsoft. So they're a PC company. So being exclusive means getting rid of the PC SKU. If you've got a PC SKU, then there's a vast amount of players in the world who will just play it on the PC. There's no reason to buy an Xbox. And so they've kind of snookered themselves by spending that much money. They can't go back to focusing just on exclusive. Making Gears of War exclusive is the stupidest thing I've heard in a long time. Gears of War is not going to sell Xboxes. Nobody's going to go out and buy an Xbox for Gears of War. They just came out and said, we're having to shutter studios because we're not making enough money. So why are you just cutting off 90 million PlayStations potentially buying your Gears of War game if your revenue is an issue? It makes no sense. And I feel very sorry for the team that's there right now because they're trying to fight through, trying to figure this out, right? How do we get to a point where we can make Xbox, the console, relevant again? And again, a huge mistake they made was confusing the world with, is Xbox a platform or is Xbox a publisher? Because when you're trumpeting the DAU and the MAU of Xbox, you're talking about a publisher that includes mobile devices and Candy Crush, right? That says nothing to the actual Xbox platform, its game console platform itself. So they've confused everybody. And they're now trying to reset things with a new leadership. But the one thing they can't solve in any short order is not having great games, not having system selling games. And even if they did have system selling games, they're now in a position where the Xbox costs so much to produce that the cost of the machine is ridiculous. And obviously the same for Sony and Nintendo. They're suffering the same problem at this point. And Helix I have no idea what Helix can be. Because if they really want to do what the original idea of Helix was, that's a $1,200 console. Nobody's buying a $1,200 console in this market. In this economy, no. Especially without having an exclusive game. And I mean exclusive to that console. It can't be played anywhere else on a PC or anything else. They're kind of in an impossible situation. So the only logical path is to become the world's #1 publisher, which in fact they are. Basically, because the competition is Tencent, who don't actually really publish games. Just acknowledge that and move forward and make money. If they are doing that, though, they're making the right decisions around some of the studios they've got, because you can't have small indie art projects in a publisher the size of Microsoft or Xbox. That doesn't make any sense either. So it's a very hard situation to work a way out of. And the decisions they're making seem to be snap judgments based on fandom as opposed to business. Canceling Gears of War on PS5 it's just a gimme to the Xbox fanboy, which is not how you run a business. They should be trying to maximize revenue at this point, especially after you've spent the money to actually put the damn thing on the platform in the first place. So it's very hard. It's honestly, it's hard to watch and it's hard to see, and they need to figure out which studios they're going to focus on. They need a better green light procedure. They need a better head of studios, frankly. The guy who basically caused them half this problem, which boggles my mind. But whether they spin out and spin off the Xbox business or just focus on becoming a publisher, and this is before we even get to the Game Pass problem and how they can make that. I mean, the other part of it, and part of why I think they brought Matt Ball in, is to try and figure out how to make Game Pass the place of entertainment on PC, because PC is where they kind of struggled to make Game Pass work. So whether it's an ad-supported version on PC to get people playing there, they need to get a much bigger install base of Game Pass players subscribing to them. And that's given them hey, here's something you can play, but it's annoying because you have to watch adverts. But if you spend this much money, then you can subscribe. And that's a potential route. But it has to be on PC. That's where the addressable market is. It's not on their own console. So yeah, that's the situation they're in. But they have a great showcase at Summer Game Fest. And there were some fantastic looking games on there. Again, nothing I would say is a system seller, but really good quality games. But you have to think that every third-party game that was on that showcase is a multi-million-dollar check they paid to the publisher of that game to put it on Game Pass. So you got Nintendo and Sony over here doing expensive first-party games that can stand up their platform. All the other games that are on their showcase are on their showcase because people want the exposure of being on a PlayStation or a Nintendo Direct, whereas Microsoft are paying all these people because they need it on Game Pass. and it's expensive. And so again, when you look at the balance of running a business, how much of that can they do? And obviously, they're going to have to continue to do that if they want Game Pass to be the destination for games. But it's tricky. It's a really hard situation, and I think Asher is a phenomenally smart woman, and maybe she can find a solution to this, but it's hard to see one.
Yeah, I think it's personally, I think it's going to be a long old journey, because if you look at like the fact that when you said essentially playing to the Xbox fanboy, that's true, because that's like the argument that's like 5-10 years are too old in regards to the platform wars. Like that doesn't exist anymore. So it's just actually how do you get exposure to good content in front of as many eyes as possible should be the root of the goal. And then also you've got the fact that if you do buy up so many studios and capture all of those IP, it's like, how do you best utilize those IP? Like we talked before about cross-pollinating content and looking at the realm of entertainment experiences rather than just gaming, and like how that in itself, to build out property that cross-pollinates, that takes some time. And do they have time in their hands? I'm not too sure. And from a sales perspective in regards to selling new hardware, there's only one game that's come recently, and it's not on Xbox, and I wasn't going to even bother with it. As soon as I heard the little jingle from Zelda, I'm going to buy myself a Switch too.
See, I mean, Nintendo have the same thing. Nintendo have an even bigger advantage over everybody else because they have generational IP.
Yeah.
So my kid is now grown up to the point she's working at the school she went to, and I always ask her how many Nintendo Mario backpacks are in the school. It's a primary school, right? And she's like, oh, 5 or 6. I mean, so they get kids. They're like Disney. Nintendo is Disney. I mean, they're not really even a video game company. They're an IP company that produces video games. They're a toy company. And so older people like me can justify buying a Switch 2 because my kids will play on it. And that's kind of, you hand it down to the generations. And then they've got this IP that just lives on and lives on and lives on. Yeah, Mario is like Mickey Mouse. I mean, he just probably even more relevant. Far more relevant than Mickey Mouse is today. And we'll just continue living on because in 5 years' time, there'll be a kid at the school with a Mario backpack because they're playing something on Switch, or Switch 2, or Switch 3, or Switch 4. And that's something you just can't buy. When we were doing the PlayStation and made a very conscious decision from a marketing standpoint to attract an older audience to Nintendo, right? It's like games growing up, right? So it was Club going, it was Wipeout soundtracks, it was all this sort of stuff. That was a conscious decision. And yes, Sony had Crash Bandicoot and Spyro, even though they were Universal IP that I worked on. But primarily it was more core. And when Microsoft came into the market, it was really core. I mean, the basis Xbox player is American PC shooter players who wanted a console because back then PCs didn't work great. And that's where they built their audience. So Nintendo has a totally separate business to everybody else. And it's a very successful one after the stumble of the Wii U. The Switch is genius. I think from Sony's standpoint, the only thing left to do right now is to make a Switch PS5 so that, kids, the family can have the TV and have the console somewhere else at the same time. But do we need a PS6? No. I mean, when we went from low def to high def, that was basically the last leap in visual splendor. I mean, yes, graphics get better every year. Yes, things look better every year. But honestly, when you're at 4K, 60 frames a second, there's nowhere else to go. And we chased this dragon. We chased this dragon of photorealistic, thinking that our market would get bigger and bigger and bigger the more realistic the graphics looked. But again, you put that control in someone's hand, they don't know what to do with it. So the visual splendor doesn't really matter. And the kids today, they're growing up playing Roblox and Minecraft and games on Steam that are not visually splendid, but have unique and authentic feel to them. And they prefer that to how much path tracing you've got going. Which is not to say there will not always be an audience for those games. There will. It's a limited size. And so we need to scope and budget games for that limited size of audience and not take outlandish risks that end with failure and studios being shut down and people not having any stability in their lives. We need commitment to 10 years of games. I want to do, if I'm committing to something, it will be game 1, assuming it works. Game 1, game 2, game 3. And then as part of that, you make the transmedia plan, right? Because after 3, that's when you start going after TV and film and comics and all this sort of stuff. It's when you've really cemented that IP in the world. But you plan it when you do game 1. I mean, this is what I tell my developers all the time. I'm like, I want to see a 10-year plan of where this IP is going. Because if you start making it up as you go along, that becomes problematic. And also, publishers and investors today want to see where their money is going to go long term. They don't want one offs. They want to see where it goes in success.
I was at a conference just the other week, and yeah, like I sat down with some investors there, and their approach to investment now versus what it was just a few years ago, it's dramatically changed. They want to see your audience base now, rather than like want to see we'll support you through the build process. It's like, no, show me the proof of concept behind this. Show me the proof of audience and engagement that you're gonna get. Like even if it's just a teaser trailer, I want to see like what the numbers are before we back you any further. And that to
Yep.
me doesn't really build games that last. So I want to kind of pivot a little bit back into your own career and kind of looking at how you did go about building games that last. I remember a podcast you on previously, you were talking about the Collier brothers and like as an IP that came through your door. I'd love to dive into that story, and then I'm going to put a pin as well into the Games Pass and digital because that's something I want to touch on as well because I'm pretty sure we both have the same disgruntlement around that as well that needs to be touched upon.
I mean, Chairman's a great story. So, Football Manager as it is today. I mean, I had just started, I've been working at Domar for about a year, I think. And we had little shelves and in the software room where demos would come in from people and graphic demos and sound demos and designs from people. And one of my jobs was to write back to these people and say, hey, thanks for sending in your piece of paper with a stick figure on it shooting somebody. We're not going to make that game today. But one of the demos that came in was an Amstrad CPC 464 demo of Championship Manager. The Collier brothers had written this and they sent it in and we booted it up on the Amstrad and we actually had a lot of fun with it. It was written in BASIC. And so we wrote back to them and said, this is fantastic. This is actually, it was addictive from the minute they sent it in. We're like, but it's written in BASIC. It's on an Amstrad. The Amstrad was dying at the time, but keep us in the loop of whatever you're working on. And about 3 or 4 months later, we got a disc with an Atari ST disc. And it was Champ Manager on the Atari ST. And so we played it. And I went to Dominic and Mark, who ran the company, and John Kavanagh, and said, look, you've got to play this. It's absolutely fantastic. It's just totally addictive. And so they played it. And so we went back to them and said, this is great. And we love it, but it's written in BASIC and we need a professional version of it done. So how about we take it off your hands and we'll give it to a development team that can do it? And to their ultimate credit, the brothers said, no, it's our baby. We're going to do it. And so the foundation of Sports Interactive was basically John and a few bunch of other people working with the Collier brothers to employ people who could program properly in assembler and make a professional product. And that became Championship Manager, and 30 years plus on or whatever, it's still going incredibly strong because the fundamentals of that game are just insane. But it was, from the minute we booted that first tape, it was incredibly addictive. And that's it. If you've got the ingredients at a low level, you can build on it. I actually stopped playing Championship Manager after a certain amount of time, personally, because it became so complex that I just I'm going to spend my entire life in this as a job at some point. Whereas early on, it was like, okay, set the team up and pick the players and do the transfers and let it play and then Control Alt Delete and restart the game when you lose. Because I'm a bloody cheat. And, that's not fair. I should have won that game. But, it's amazing. But the thing about those games, but the risk was so low, right? So when Jason Rubin was doing a talk going over his career at the game business the other week, and he goes back to when they were 2 or 3 guys and they were in the Universal lot and they were building Crash Bandicoot on the back of the technology of the game they built before. And it was just low risk. It was $1 million, if that. And you could do that. And then in success, they went and did the sequel in a year. And then they did a sequel in a year after that. And then they did a completely different game that was a kart racing game in a year after that. I mean, the risk was incredibly low and the rewards were incredibly high. Whereas now, the risk is incredibly high and the rewards can be very, very mixed, especially if you don't commit to doing, okay, number 1's great, number 2, number 3. If you don't commit to doing all 3 of them, if the first one just doesn't work, you don't do the second one. I get that. But if you've got an audience and you've got a community, which is what it's all about now, and which is the other thing today, it's like launching games is so different to how it used to be. It's finding your consumer and finding your community and building them up before the game's even out. so that you've got a loyal following of people who will defend your game on their lives when people start throwing shade against it. It's a very, very different world. And I don't think a lot of publishers and a lot of first parties even have adapted to it terribly well. And that's why you see a struggle. And that's why you're seeing the mid-level publishers start having the breakout hits and doing some really interesting stuff. And the indie guys, the indie teams doing the same thing. Their risk is much lower. Their rewards are much lower. But if you get it right, you end up with things like Among Us, which took years, right? I mean, they launched Among Us and nothing happened, right? It just sat there. And then it suddenly started getting picked up in playgrounds by kids. And they're like playing, have you seen this? Have you seen this? And it went viral and it went further viral. And suddenly it's like the biggest game ever. And now they got a TV show and they're doing sequels. They've got their own publishing label and they're helping other indies. And it's just like the greatest story ever. And good on them, because that was a lot of hard work and a lot of effort, and it could have gone completely the other way. And the fact that they give back so much is beautiful to see, because there are lots and lots of indie teams out there who are struggling. Everyone talks about the AAA stuff and all the rest of it, but there's a lot of people who are struggling in this market, because trying to break through the noise and make your games a hit is incredibly hard, no matter who you are. It's much easier when you can spend a few $100,000 putting it on Jeff's Summer Game Fest or the TGAs or be at Gamescom. That gives you an advantage. And a friend of mine is always saying the safest place in gaming right now is the $1 to $200 million AAA game. As long as you do it right, as long as you make sure the market wants that game, which is lots of consumer testing and lots of research and lots of letting people play things early. There is a path you can take that you can say, yeah, I know this is going to be a pretty solid hit, which is, again, people skip. Lots of people think I'm the God's gift to design. I mean, Highguard was the most interesting launch of the last year or two, because that was a bunch of guys who thought their egos were bigger than the world. And so it wasn't a bad game. It was a very nice game. It was actually quite a different game, but the way they approached the market with it was, hey, we know better than you. You're going to love this. Rather than, hey, community, come in and play this game and let it tell us what's right with it, tell us what's wrong with it, and we can fix it. They approached the market completely wrong, and it ended up getting torched as a result. You can't have an ego like that anymore. And the other thing that publishers and finances are terrified of and hate doing is killing things. I did a list once on Twitter, when it was Twitter, and I posted it on LinkedIn, of the 35 games I've killed in my career. And honestly, probably should have been 45 or 55, but 35 is a pretty good number. They just weren't working, right? Something was wrong. Development team was wrong. The idea was wrong. The market had changed, whatever it was. You need to be reviewing stuff all the time and seeing if it's still on point. And when you've got a 5 to 7 year dev plan, everything changes. The idea that you had when you started is not the market you're going to launch into. So Concord fell foul of this. Again, Concord was not a bad game. It was a beautifully produced game. But at the end of the day, it was another hero shooter that offered nothing new. And after 5 or 6 years in development, everybody had already played that game. And there was no reason to attach to it, because you were just like thrown into a multiplayer test and said, hey, play this game. It's great, with crappy Guardians of the Galaxy. And everyone was like, I don't need to. I've already got Overwatch. I've already got this. I've already got that. There was nothing that sold it. And what I always tell my developers when they're doing their pitch decks, what is it? Why is it different? Because that's your marketing hook. And there was no marketing hook to Concord whatsoever.
That's true. What about games where historically a lot of games have been driven by the depth of character? So if we look at, again, like my favorite game of all time is like game franchise of all time is The Last of Us. So like, and I was drawn to that in regards to that unconditional love between Ellie and Joel, and then like the progression that it made between Ellie and Abby in part 2, and even to what they've done in regards to the HBO series. I felt that the first season, I think it was episode 3, where they created the relationship, that I was just like, this is just amazing TV. Like the emotional resonance I have towards that type of content is really powerful to me. But then again, like looking at things like God of War and the pivot that they've just done in regards to their upcoming title, I think it's a really good choice. But I'd love to get your take on that kind of pivot on world versus character, where traditionally a lot of people have relied heavily upon character.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, I'm a huge character-focused game. I think the shift of Ghost of Tsushima to Ghost of Yotai was really interesting. They didn't feel that the original character could have an ongoing story, so they reset it. I mean, at the end of the day, it's down to script writing and how you tell the story, and that emotional resonance in The Last of Us was pretty crazy, actually. I mean, it really was. It was a film, right? It was as good as a film. By the time we got to the quality of interaction and visuals was so good that you could have been watching a movie. And when Joel kicks the bucket, it's that was like hard. Personally, I think Last of Us 2 should have been 2 games. I mean, talk about the excesses that we go to. They could have split that game in half and had Last of Us 2 and Last of Us 3 and made twice as much money, because it was way too long. I mean, by the time I got to Santa Barbara in that game, I wanted to shoot myself. I was just like, I just had enough of it. Because it's not exactly an uplifting, happy story. I think the God of War one is really interesting. I mean, for me, they're trying to change the gameplay, right? So the one thing I've always said about God of War is I love the original games, the Dave Jaffe games, because they were really fun, right? It was just like, I'm a freaking powerful god. I've got these big freaking chains. I'm just killing shit. And I'm just like picking up glowing gorbs and I'm running on and killing some more stuff and then have a huge boss fight. And that's awesome. With the 2018 game and the 2022 game, whenever it was, it slowed down a lot. It became more of an RPG. It became a lot slower as an IP. And I think with Laufey, they're trying to go back to the combat being quicker again and probably more fun. And I think that's a great thing. I honestly, I liked the 2018 God of War game. I liked Ragnarok, but I was a bit miffed at it at times. Taking Kratos' son and walking down the back of walking down a river on the back of a buffalo for about 45 minutes, getting off occasionally to shoot bridges and open them up while it just talked at me was just like tedious. So if Laufey seems to be, from what I understand, a connecting bridge between the last God of War and the next God of War with Kratos as the lead character, then I think it's a really fun way to change up the gameplay in the same universe that people are attached to. And you can pay attention to the online Twitter trolls and all the rest of it saying, oh, I don't want to play a woman. Okay, well, great, don't play it. You played a kid walking down a river on the back of a buffalo for 45 minutes. I mean, I think the tolerance of the people who actually played and finished the last God of War game is a bit higher than that. At the end of the day, if the new God of War is a 95 rated Game of the Year contender, it'll sell. And it'll sell enough to justify making it and justify the fact that they're continuing the IP on. So I think brand extensions are always there, right? It's always, talking to the Skybound guys the other day. I mean, if you want an IP that's had as many extensions as you could possibly have, it's The Walking Dead, right? I mean, it's gone off in every different direction with a connecting fiber underneath of being zombie world. And it's been very successful. People want to inhabit the world in different ways. I mean, it's not one size fits all at times. If I can get more God of War games, I want more God of War games. It's a great IP and it's an ongoing IP, that they've kept relevant. So this is just trying to keep it relevant in a different way. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if it's successful. I think it will be. I think that Sony Santa Monica is just one of those teams that creates incredibly compelling games. And, it's got the dude from The Boys in it, who I think is hysterical as the Cube. So I'm sold on that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it looks incredible. It's definitely one for my list. I did say before that I was going to put a pin in it, and I wanted to come back to the whole Games Pass thing. It's something that I've never truly been sold on, because maybe it's just, again, I'm a grumpy old man. Maybe it's the fact that I grew up on a time where you bought a game and you got an additional t-shirt with it, or you went and queued outside a game at midnight to get the latest release, or there's more of a fandom towards it now, rather than this thing where, especially now, if everything's downloadable and it's sat on your console, and then you have to kind of delete games on the console that kind of get new ones put on there because you've only got a certain amount of storage space. It's like Games Passes, there's pros and cons to them, so I'd love to get your pros and cons.
I'm not sure how open and blunt I should be. I think it's cancer, honestly. I thought Game Pass was an absolutely brilliant idea when it was Chris Charla funding independent developers to put little indie games on that you could play in a few hours and dip in and out of and just see, and they would fund the independent developer to do this stuff. That I thought was a great idea. I think it gave exposure to games that would never be seen. What it's turned into and had to become, because they're trying to justify the cost, is problematic because it's basically cheapening games. It makes them very disposable. There's data available now, right? People on Xbox play games for shorter amount of time, but they play more games, right? So they're downloading it, trying it out for 10 minutes and go, meh, next thing. That's not good. I come from a world where I got a Transformers game for Christmas in like 1988, and it was crap. And I still played through it because it was my Christmas present and I didn't have another 10 quid to go and buy another one. So even though it wasn't great, I played through it because it was the only game I was going to get. And if you take Game Pass to the next, or actually current world, where you can stream the game, you're literally not even bothering to download it. Half the problem, half the thing now is if you download the game, that takes 20, 30 minutes or an hour, depending on where you are. And so there's that commitment of time from doing that to do another one that you're like, okay, I'm going to give it some time to play it. But otherwise, you just like flip in, flip out, flip out. It's the Roblox problem, right? The Roblox thing is kids going and going until they land on something that they like. That's what Game Pass brings. And from a consumer standpoint, I totally understand it. Paying 25 or 22, whatever bucks a month to play all these great games, it sounds great. But at the end of the day, there's a time issue here, which is Ghost of Yotai took me 65 hours, I think, to complete. Okay, so I spent $70 on that and got like pretty much $1 an hour out of it, which is amazing. Good value when you compare it to anything else in the world. But I didn't need to really play anything else for that 3 weeks that it took me to finish it. I didn't need to have 10 other games on tap because I wanted to finish this one game. And I have a limited amount of time in my life. So again, when you look at Game Pass and the total addressable market that they've got, you've got to justify that $22 a month that I'm going to play game after game after game after game. And if I'm just playing 3 or 4 games a year, which is generally what most people do, it's expensive. It's not value, and it is harming the industry in that way. It's also supporting the industry, right? So the other argument, the counter argument, is you look at the showcase and you look at those games from other publishers that are on that showcase that Microsoft have written checks to get them on Game Pass. A lot of those publishers might not have committed to those games had they not been getting a check from Microsoft. So it's mid-tier publishers will pick up games because, hey, I can get that game basically paid for by somebody else. So it does support certain stuff in that regard, but from a how it damages the perception of gaming, I just don't think it's very healthy for us, and it only benefits Microsoft, right? Really, I mean that's it. The whole concept behind Game Pass, when they came up with it, was it's a walled garden. You come into my walled garden, you don't play anything else. So I don't want you going and looking at this game, and I don't want you looking at that game. I don't want you going over there. I want you in my walled garden, which is monetizing for me, no one else. Arguably free-to-play games are the same thing, right? So I totally understand that argument. And again, there are 5, 6, 10 maybe free-to-play games that are just dominating the market and make lots of money. And they service that community well, and they take a lot of time from players that they don't have to do. They don't have time to play other things. So same thing. But generally, if you've got your 1 or maybe 2 at most free-to-play, live service game that you're playing, you'll still dabble in other stuff, and you'll go out and you'll look at stuff and you'll play them. And that's why I also think building the single-player limited time experience, the 5 to 10 to 20-hour game, is important because that person is engaged in Fortnite, Call of Duty, or Warframe, and that's what they're playing evening in and evening out. But then I can spend 10 hours just finishing this game or 15 hours playing this game. It's a commitment that without being a massive commitment of my life, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think you mentioned about like the 3 or 4 games that people play a year, and we've got limited amount of time. Like we're both dads, and as you kind of progress through different parts of your kind of age, you got like your 20s where you've got a bit more time in your hands, your 30s where you're working, but you generally don't have kids, and then your 40s where you've got everything. It's time is quite an important factor, and I know that a lot of people are focusing on like an underserved and mid-core audience, and arguing that like there's people have got 15 minutes on their hands and they want to pick something up and play for 15 minutes. But I think I would counter that and say, well, actually,
that's why this exists, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this exists because I can go into the bathroom and play Candy Crush.
But
that's what people use it for.
I would also counter that to say that like real games that you can kind of get your teeth into. I do think that when something resonates with you, and you have the ability to sit down and play and really engross yourself in the experience. Like we both played. I finished it a little while ago. The latest Bond game's amazing. Pragmata, really, really love.
Yeah.
Maybe let's dive into Pragmata a bit, because I think that like that's a bit against the curve of what we've said in regards to a lot of these remakes and remasters. Like that's a new IP that, yeah, I think is amazing, to be honest.
There's always something happening. I mean, I've always struggled with Death Stranding, for example, because there's so much plodding around in it. So if I want to go and just give an hour to the game, I need to be able to achieve something in that hour. And I found with Death Stranding, much as I admire it as a piece of technology and there's a very odd story, I just couldn't plod across mountains for hours. It didn't give me any joy. I wanted something to happen, and 2 is better, but I still struggle with it a little bit. First Light, I can put it on for an hour and just have go through the game and just do something and be really happy that I spent that hour with the game, and then plod and go back to it the next day. And yeah, time is an incredible constraint for people. There is so much trying to grab your attention. I mean, at night, do I boot Netflix? Do I boot Amazon Prime? Do I boot Hulu? Do I boot PlayStation? Do I boot Xbox? Do I go on my phone? Am I looking at the World Cup at the moment? It's like there are so many things competing for time that you don't necessarily have to commit to. And and this is why I think from a subscription standpoint, Netflix is much more sensible than Game Pass, because Netflix never really asks me to commit 65 hours to complete something, right? I can flip from series to series to series on Netflix, and I'm done with a show in 10 hours, right? So if you really want to binge watch something, you can binge watch it in a day. Whereas I can't binge play Ghost of Yota in a day. It's not possible, right? So that's where the Game Pass differentiation is. You're asking me to subscribe to something that I can dip in and out of. I'm just going to buy a game. And when games are on Game Pass, I'll never stop saying, just go and buy the game. That's giving money to the developer so they can survive. So buy it. If you like it, buy it. And and there are lots of people who try things on Game Pass and then go and buy the game. That's great. I'd rather you just went and bought the game.
I would love to get your take, because you mentioned Netflix. I'd love to get your take on Netflix and their kind of games division, because there's 2 people that have exited there that I really, really rate: Leanne Loeb and Mike Verdu. I'm curious as to they have their disposal a huge audience base. They had the logic behind them that mobile's the perfect controller, and they had the idea to kind of use legacy content to get people in and through the door, and like just to kind of experience. I remember like GTA San Andreas was on there not too long ago, and there's been some really good content on there. I'm curious as to what your view is of Netflix games as a disruptor potentially within the sphere.
Well, Leanne's a very good friend, and she's incredibly smart. They're building some great stuff, and she will make them massively successful. The thing with Netflix is it's a data-driven company. And so they know what's running and they know what's working. And so the idea that it was basically just a portal for mobile games didn't make a lot of sense. When you get to the point where you're streaming to the television and you're using the phone as a controller, again, hardcore games don't make any sense. So they went through the data, and Amazon has done this with Luna too, right? I mean, they're both into the same situation where they've discovered that if you're going to have somebody sitting in front of a television streaming games, chances are it's family party games. I mean, I played You Don't Know Jack with my kids over Christmas, and we're just sitting there. We've all got our phones as a controller, and we're just playing that stuff. Would I play GTA on my TV streamed onto my phone? No. Why would I do that when I've got a PS5? And so I think Netflix tried it, and they spun up some really great studios. Chaco was running one, who's now running That's No Moon. And they were trying to do an Overwatch-style shooter. But streaming has lag and latency, so doing a shooter is the hardest thing you can possibly do, and a competitive shooter is almost impossible without getting a lot of complaints. That market isn't there. That audience has got a PC and they've got a console. So why would they play it through Netflix? It made no sense. So I think they're absolutely right in where they're headed. It's party games. They've got their soccer game for the World Cup, which is everyone's, got a 1-star rating. It's something to chuck on at half time, right? You just play a quick game of football. It's just like tap, 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 tap. Scored a goal. It's not trying to be FIFA. And that's where it's smart. And so if you can get kids into games on the phone, using their phone as a controller at a young age, they're playing Bluey and Dora and all this sort of stuff through Netflix. It's great. You got another pillar of the platform. But are those people going to go on and play Call of Duty on a mobile phone through the streaming TV? No, it doesn't make any sense. Streaming has its problem inherently, but I quite like my Stadia. It was perfectly good and it was perfectly fun. I live in an area with incredibly fast internet connection, so it was perfectly fine. But again, without having a first-party exclusive audience, which Google shut down, there was no reason to have one. So, and at the end of the day, they're never going to get over this problem that if I bought Assassin's Creed on Stadia and was a complete bastard and decided to just leave the Stadia on for a week with something resting on the controls, spinning the character round and round and round, by the time that week's over, it's actually costing Ubisoft more money to pay me to than I spent buying it in the first place, because every bit you're streaming down is costing money. So you're running a server. So unless you're getting that server time for free, which is not likely, especially in an AI world, it's expensive. And so, okay, in a subscription model, that can work, right? Because again, you're going for the gym membership idea that we're going to have 1 million subscribers and 900,000 of them are going to use it for 2 days a year, but they'll keep subscribing because it's there, and which is the Game Pass idea as well. But I think with Game Pass, people are too savvy, right? They go on, they killed their $1 idea, subscribe for $1, because they were trying to get the gym membership thing going, but people would subscribe for $1, play the game they wanted to play, and then cancel because they're too savvy. And then, so they stopped that, but people still do. I mean, retention has been their biggest problem. Like, they've got a pretty good, solid level of users on Game Pass, and there's a lot of people who jump in and out. Like, oh, there's 3 games I want to play on there this month. I'll subscribe for the month.
There's an awful lot of challenges, and it's funny because when you were talking about Netflix before, my immediate thought was to kind of link that back to Xbox, because yes, Netflix as a gaming platform doesn't really make sense. It makes sense to provide community and makes sense to provide engagement and those short bursts of experience. At the same point, the way that my brain works, I'm like, well, with the amount of money that they generate, it would make perfect sense because they're also short on new IP.
Everything we do in this industry comes down to games. It comes down to content. It comes down to making me want to engage, right? And feeling I can't live without it. So Sony have that, Nintendo have that, Microsoft have never been able to build it because they've never been able to build a studio system that supplies a constant raft of games that you can't live without, right? I mean, everyone makes a joke about the TGA Game of the Year poster where all the games of the year are on there and there's not one from Xbox, right? I mean, it's not that they're producing bad games, they're just not producing games that I would sell my soul for. And that's unfortunate. And the games they had, like everybody else, the disaster at Sony, let's not sugarcoat Sony. Jim Ryan's period at Sony was a disaster. Pivoting the company to live service was a disaster. Fortunately, pulled out of it in time. And so Insomniac and Naughty Dog and everyone else is now not making live service games. They're making stuff that people buy PlayStations for. But they spent an awful lot of money on companies and projects that just didn't work. But they have that studio system that they've got that can supply stuff that people want. Microsoft have, even Halo, right? I mean, Halo was the IP, right? And Halo Infinite came out and it wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. And it wasn't sticky. And they tried to turn a game that was definitely not live service into a live service game. I mean, for me, Halo was all about tactical changing on the battlefield depending on what weapons you could pick up off the floor. That doesn't work in live service, right? You're trying to pick up one gun and rank it up and make it more powerful and make it more powerful. But the whole point of Halo was I can pick up the Flood's gun and start using that instead, and pick up this and start using that instead. That was the fun of Halo. If they want Halo to be successful again, you have to go back to the basics of making a really great campaign shooter that has really fun PvP multiplayer. But you don't try and monetize. It's just fun. It's just online deathmatch fun. You start there and then you start working off that. They lost sight of that. And so they thought Halo would be a platform, and it's not, because it never really supported that. So yeah, I think they're in between a rock and a hard place, because making that new IP and building those studios is really, really hard. And to do it now is especially difficult and expensive. And to do it when you haven't got an install base platform that's high enough to support doing it exclusively, and you're basically in a catch-22 situation.
Yeah, I'm looking at like we mentioned risk earlier on, but I'm looking at the risk factor specifically to the US gaming market and how at the employment base, because even at my time at EA, we used to often utilize third-party devs from other localities, but at the same point as driving down costs, you've also increased the skill set and skill base of those particular regions. And not only are they more well-skilled in kind of places like South Korea or Romania or pick any locality that we used to kind of farm out stuff to, they're not only are they highly skilled, also the from a law perspective, like I'm really stoked for the stories that are gonna come out from like places like Africa and Saudi Arabia through their Vision 2030 stuff. Like I wanna see new experiences land that I haven't traditionally seen, and that's where I think all the growth's gonna come from. What's the US and market look
It's
like?
actually pretty simple. If you're a studio in the US today, you have to have a very small core team that basically spins up the idea and starts iterating on it. And then when you get to 20 or 30 people, everything else is co-devved somewhere else, whether
Yeah.
it's Europe or South America or Asia. You go somewhere cheaper so that the core of your team is the only thing that's running at the burn rate, 20, 25,000 a man month, which is insane. I mean, I was talking to somebody from Brazil the other day, and I'm like, what's your actual internal man month rating? It's like about 3,000. I mean, you can't compete with that. And because tools have become to the point where everything kind of equalized, I mean, everybody can use Unreal. And everybody is using Unreal. So the people in Poland using Unreal are just as talented as the people in America using Unreal. So you have a small core team with a great idea and you fund that, and then you outsource when it's right and when the time is right. And so a lot of problems you see spinning up is doing that at the wrong time. If you start scaling to 200 people, no matter where they are in the world at the wrong time, you're going to end up in a world of hurt. I mean, this is what basically happened to BioShock, from my understanding, is they had a team in Novato, and then they outsourced it to the team in Montreal, but they did it way too early before they really knew what the game was, and everyone was just hanging around waiting on decisions being made, and that's a terrible situation to end up in. You've got to know exactly what you're building and have it all planned out. But that's what you do. I mean, that's the only way North American development survives. We have a lot of fantastically talented people who can do that on a smaller level. And then you have teams like Insomniac and Naughty Dog and Sucker Punch who they're fine, right? They're not too big to make no sense, and they make massive blockbusters that, but Naughty Dog's been outsourcing art to China since, the mid-2000s. I mean, I was over at Adia in China in 2008, 2009, and Naughty Dog basically had a wing of the building that was locked off because, all their art and props and everything else were being done there. China's not as cheap as it used to be. They're probably 3 times more expensive than they were when we first started using Chinese developers in 2006, 2007, but 3 times the price is still half the price of over here. So you have to think about these things. So that's how you have to approach development today. And you're seeing a lot more teams spun up in South America and in Eastern Europe where things are just cheaper to get. Saber uses a lot of Eastern European and Russian development to make their games cheaper. And it makes sense, right? You can take Space Marine 2 looks damn great. What they did with that was fantastic. We did Space Marine 1 at THQ, and it was a huge amount of fun. And they took that to the next level and did a great job of it. They had a really good foundation, a really solid foundation from what we built, and they did something even better with it. But they didn't spend $100 million building it because they didn't have to. They built it somewhere where it was much cheaper to build it. The success has been phenomenal and very profitable. Then the risk wasn't that high.
I've got 3 questions really to close out with. The first one being, obviously, we've got a behemoth that's coming out in November in terms of So
What would that be?
Yeah. So what's from that first question perspective, what do you think the landscape looks like post GTA? What sort of impact that's going to have? What's your view, I guess, in that perspective? And secondly to that is, what are you most excited about the latter stage of 2026 and early stage of 2027 that you really want to sit down and play? And then the final question being, what would your key thought and takeaway be that you'd like to leave with our audience?
The effect of GTA, I think it's going to suck up an awful lot of time. It's going to suck up awful lot of attention. And the reason people are running away from that November date is not just because GTA is coming out and everyone's going to be playing it. It's more you won't be able to get a word in edgeways, right? Trying to market a game in the GTA world is just don't even try, right? I mean, you can counter program it, but at the end of the day, Twitter and Discord and everything else is going to be flooded with people playing GTA. It's going to be GTA everywhere. I think the upside of it is it'll be an incredible game, and I think it'll sell a lot of PlayStations. So I think that benefits everybody as long as you stay out of the blast radius. You know, it's GTA, so it'll take, I don't know, probably a month or a couple of months for people to play through it. So come January, February, March, the blast radius will be cleared. GTA Online will keep going on doing its own thing, and we'll be back to normal. It can only benefit the industry from a perspective of, like I say, console sales, whether that be Xbox or PlayStation, and also just the attention the world gives video games is often, you know, odds with how successful we really are. We're a massive industry, and people still think it's kids playing games. Yeah, it's far from that. So I think that's good. In terms of things I'm excited about, I'm excited for things like Alien Isolation 2. I hate horror games because I'm a scaredy cat, so I can play them in really short bursts. And, you know, so the last Resident Evil I'm still working through because I can only play for very short periods of time before I go, why am I subjecting myself to this horror shit? But what I love about Alien Isolation is I loved the first game, and it was a game that got killed by resale because it was fairly short and people bought it, and then they took it back to GameStop, and then there was no reason for Sega to greenlight a sequel back then because they knew exactly the same thing would happen because you could only make those games fairly short. And I love the Creative Assembly guys. I mean, you know, they did the port of Microcosm.
Yeah.
They did the PC version of that when it was just Tim Ansel in 1993. So they go back a long, long way, and I love seeing them be successful. And Alien Isolation 2 will do great. I think it's great time, great product. Looking forward to Wolverine. Anything Insomniac does, I love. Looking forward to whatever Naughty Dog does next. I love what IO are doing with Hitman and what they're doing with Bond, and the idea of this concept of single player games that have add-on packs that continue it on. Bridge the gap between game 1 and game 2 and game 3 with add-on content. It's a great way of using resources. It's a great way of when you spin down a team before you have to grow it up again on the sequel, you can have them doing additional content and keep your player engaged in your game. I think is super, super smart. Really clever people over there. I love what the guys at Arrowhead are doing with Helldivers. It's another team that I love greatly. I want to see what Housemarque does next. I mean, all my old school buddies, basically. And then there's just new stuff coming out all the time that just is inspiring. As a consumer, we're in a really great place, right? We're seeing more choice and better games and more variety in the world than ever. But we just have to, as a business, approach it differently and approach it more sensibly. And so, you know, that's kind of what I've spent the last 2 years preaching. And I work with dev teams to try and make them work toward that goal, and, you know, see what you can get out in a short time and with a lower budget, and see if you can test the waters and make people fall in love with your IP, and then have the plan already in place to grow it up.
From an indie perspective, is there anything specifically that's drawing your gaze at this moment in time as well?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I've been doing this, like I said, for 38 years, and the greatest thing ever had. The first year I did it, I was in college doing a year of computer science, and I got approached by John to come and work for Domark up in the city. And my mum and dad went, video games, computer games, really? And I sat down with them, and they were like, look, if you really want to do this, we'll give you a year. If it's not successful in a year, you promise you'll go back to school. And I'm like, sure. Yes, I'll make that deal. And that was 38 years ago. And so it's been a hobby. It was my hobby then. I went home and I sat making graphics and doing sound and programming in the mid-'80s. When I was at Psygnosis, I was working insane hours. I mean, I was in the office all weekend. I would be there. And then I'd go home and I'd boot up GPaint and Soundtracker and do art and music. It was my life. And so kids came along, that kind of made things difficult and harder, but it's still, when I get off this call, I'll probably go and finish First Light because I want to, not because I have to.
Good. Well, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Take care, man. Thank you very much.